Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about Kashmir, the Indian occupied Kashmir. We'll be talking about the misery of people living there. We'll be talking about the atrocities committed by the Indian troops, and we have recently heard that they have actually gotten more than 60,000 fresh troops there as well. So you can well imagine the previous number was around 700,000 and now you're looking at somewhere 750,000 troops deployed in Kashmir to look after the affairs out there and to make sure that this indigenous movement of Kashmiri people, this struggle should come to an end, which seems to be an impossible task for the Indian soldiers there. We'll be also talking about the Indian ceasefire all along the line of control, where they've killed a lot of Pakistani civilians. There was bombing all over the LOC in particular, in Khamdi area and certain other sectors as well. Then we'll be also talking about Pakistan-India relations. Is there any hope that these two countries can improve the relationship, because the entire region depends a lot on them. There's another very important issue regarding Article 35A. If that is abolished, what would be the status of the Kashmiris? Currently, they enjoy that particular article, but a lot of lawyers, I would say, they have taken stay against it and they have presented that in the court also. And what about the current status of the High Court of Kashmir or the Supreme Court of India for that matter on this particular issue? The changing demographics in Kashmir, as we all know that Kashmir is a place where Kashmiris were living for centuries. Now the demographic changes mean that a lot of non-Kashmiris are settling there just exactly on the same lines what we have witnessed earlier in Palestine for that matter. Slowly but surely grabbing the area, and if certain articles are abolished, then things would be different. Then we'll be also talking about the Kashmir conflict and the offer made by none other than the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, where he said that he is ready to mediate between Pakistan and India. But interestingly, the Foreign Office of India denied that. But having said that, since this particular reference was made when Mr. Donald Trump met Narendra Modi in Osaka in Japan, and they had a very interesting meeting in which, according to Mr. Donald Trump, Narendra Modi said that you can do the role of the arbitrator there and let's sort this issue out. And this was again repeated by Mr. Donald Trump when Prime Minister Imran Khan met him in Washington recently, and he said that this was the offer from the Indian, and Imran Khan Saab, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, very categorically mentioned that we are ready to take any step in that regard. If India is ready to take one step, we are ready to take two steps. We'll be talking about that in detail in today's program. We'll be also talking to some Indian politicians as well as some Indian journalists there in India. Let me introduce you to the panel which we have in our studio at the moment. On my right is Saeed Imam Saab. Needs no introduction, is a very seasoned and senior politician, is an MNA from Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and is the chairman of Kashmir Committee. Thank you very much, sir, for taking out your time and being here in our show. We have with us Rauf Hassan Saab. Rauf Hassan Saab, again, needs no introduction, is a senior analyst, political commentator. Thank you very much, Rauf Saab. And we have with us Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, former ambassador and a senior diplomat. Thank you very much, Naqvi Saab. And we'll be also talking to Mani Shankar Iyer Saab. Mani Shankar Iyer Saab is an Indian National Congress leader, has been the former petroleum minister there as well in the Congress government. But sir, first question, since Fakhar Saab, you're here, you were the chairman of the Kashmir Committee. A lot of observations from our side, a lot of issues regarding the Kashmiris living in the Indian occupied Kashmir, sir. People are afraid that if this particular article is taken off, 35A, what would be their future? And how will they handle everything out there? Because currently, sir, the use of force is exceeding on almost daily basis. Number of people being killed, that's multiplying. People who are blinded, that's right in front of you. And the kind of atrocities the Indian forces are committing there, it's unbelievable. From young children to elderly, no one is safe, sir. Your take, Imam Sahib.
Thank you, Faisal Rehman Sahib. Indian occupied Kashmir, I think, is undergoing possibly the worst possible tyrannical situation on the global stage today. On one side is justice, on the other is tyranny. 48-49 UN General Assembly resolutions and Security Council earmarked two things: plebiscite for the people of Kashmir to decide their future, that Kashmir is a disputed territory. These are the two grundnorms of those resolutions, which actually stand till today. It's tragic that for 72 years nobody's been able to implement them. It was the Indian government which went to the UN Security Council, and this was the end result to which all the P5 countries, along with India and Pakistan, had committed that they would honor it. But the Indians have constantly gone back on their word, and today the situation is, as you have said, estimated amounts are that over 100,000 Kashmiris in the Indian occupied area have been martyred, and several thousands have suffered all kinds of atrocities. As you've said, pellet guns for the first time were introduced after Burhan Wani's martyrdom in July 2016, and the quantum of children suffered, women raped, it goes into the thousands, if not tens of thousands. So that's the thing today, and now over 700,000 troops, and we've heard that more troops are being brought in. Article 35A is the delineation. There were these two articles, 35A and 370. 370 gives India special status, no other state of India. In fact, this was the compromise arrived at because the disputed accession notice that was given, which nobody has seen, and it was given on the 26th of October 47 by the Maharaja at that time, Hari Singh. And now the issue is, today, I think this is the high point, let me come to that.
Sure.
For me, important thing is that for the first time, a person in the office of the United States President has said, and he hasn't said it on his own, he said, I was asked by Prime Minister Modi, will you be the mediator, the arbitrator? The two words used are mediator, arbitrator. And this is the President of the United States in a 45 minute press conference with Prime Minister Imran Khan.
And he said that on camera.
No, during a press conference,
exactly.
It's global.
Exactly.
And office of the United States President, such a thing has never been said in the past in the office of the US President. For whatever one can agree or disagree with Mr. Trump, but he is holding the most powerful position in the world today. And having said that, for the first time, to me, it's a silver lining. Yes, the whole of the Indian establishment, starting with the foreign minister, the Lok Sabha, the Indian think tanks have gone against it. And in fact, it shows again, as far as Kashmir is concerned, we heard about that India's secularism, the democratic order, their think tanks, some of their universities. But it also shows that as far as Kashmir is concerned, there are hardly any voices in India. And this is the tragedy of the Indian large a country which has, except for the Indira Gandhi emergency, has gone through democratic order on a very huge scale, that as far as the conscience is concerned and Kashmir is concerned, very few people, I can name them just 3 or 4 that I know of, will come out and oppose the Indian state policy on Kashmir.
Yeah, that's correct, sir, because we hardly hear much about it. Maybe they have a very strict media, and that seems to be very much following the government line there as well. Now, Rauf Saab, since you've been a part of so many backdoor channels where you've been visiting India, you've been conducting seminars here, and you have the insight what exactly is going on. So if you look at the last 3 years, the way this whole, I would say, indigenous movement has gained momentum, that's remarkable, especially when Burhan Wani, as earlier mentioned by Fakhr Saab, was martyred in July 2006, almost 3 years ago. We saw that a lot of youngsters, they got involved. And youngsters have always been a part of this particular movement. But sir, they have been targeted so brutally, just as if to make sure that this movement, this homegrown effort, should be crushed at all the levels. But despite that, it's multiplying. Do you see this momentum to continue the way it is, sir? Or do you think that, let's suppose if 35 is abolished, or for that matter 370, or something of that sort happens, there is going to be a significant change, sir.
More than anything else, Faisal, I think I call the Kashmir dispute a human problem. It's becoming a worse human problem with the passage of time. And I think this is what you've also talked about. Protest emerges when there is tyranny. And there has been a lot of tyranny in the Indian part of Kashmir over a number of years. Consequently, there has been protest, which has now been indigenized to a point that it appears to be beyond the control of the Indian forces. And that is why they have recently announced the further reinforcement by another 10,000 troops. But you may bring another 500,000 troops. The fact is that you can't quell it. You may be able to curb it for a while, but it keeps coming back simply because a huge number of people in Kashmir feel tyrannized. Their families have been destroyed, their women have been raped, their children have been blinded, and so much else, basically. Their futures have been darkened.
You talk about any tragedy, and that has already occurred in Kashmir.
It's there. And this has been noted at the international level. In addition to what President Trump said, I think like the EU Parliament discussed it, and that was unprecedented. It discussed it, and I have personally, heard the transcript of that debate, and there were some very unkind words said about the situation in Kashmir with regard to Indian attitude. More recently, in the last couple of years, one after the other, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has come up with 2 reports, which are very, very critical of the Indian state's attitude and administration of the Indian part of Kashmir. This had never happened before also, because this issue of Kashmir has been virtually had been sort of kept aside. It was not debated at the United Nations or any other fora in the international community. So what really has happened is that the trouble which had started, or which was attributed to Pakistan way back in 1964 and 65, the Operation Gibraltar, that has now been indigenized to a point where virtually every young person in Kashmir has become a part of that. And that is the reason why the Indians are very touchy about it now. And there is talk of abolition of Article 35A, which deals with Indian citizenship granted to all subjects of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. There is also talk about abrogating 370 also, which gives Jammu and Kashmir a special status within the Indian Dominion. It is not like any other province of the Indian Kashmir. Only according to that agreement, India was ceded the powers of, I think, foreign affairs, communication, and one other thing. So everything else is controlled by the state of Jammu and Kashmir legislature. So it's not like a typical Indian province. So it maintains a special status. But what is now being done, the most important factor that I would like to highlight, is changing the demographics of Kashmir. And this is the reason why they are talking in terms of abrogating 35A, because that controls that. That is the oversight, that provides the oversight on that not happening. And and it is being done, or it is being thought of, to change the demographics by converting the Hindu minority into Hindu majority, so that the Indian Dominion would be able to win elections in Indian part of Kashmir and then thereby control the state to a point that it wants to. So there is a lot of resentment about it, particularly among the Kashmiris, and I beg to disagree with my colleague here, that there are only 3 or 4 voices in Kashmir. I'm hearing an increasing number of voices within the Indian intelligentsia which are objecting to this kind of thing. They are coming up with articles, they're coming up with television programs, they're coming up with statements, and they are...
Has it increased? That's what you're saying.
It is increasing. It has increased in the last 3, 4, 5 years. It has. And it is increasing because they feel the pinch. All of them feel the pinch. India has been very proud of its secular identity, which unfortunately has already been compromised. But the fact is, that I personally met many people, who were very candid. This latest track 2 that we conducted here in Islamabad only about 3 weeks ago, this was focused on the youth of India and Pakistan. This is the change. So we had some wonderful delegates from India, and I think they were very open about it. They said, we have to do something about Kashmir. This cannot continue like this. And a lot of people I've heard, one of the former very senior diplomats of India said India has lost Kashmir. He even went to the extent of saying that India has lost. It was, I think, the person who wrote this book together with our general. He said this. I was in London, he'd come there he had come there, for the launching of the same book. And he said, India has virtually lost Kashmir. So the people going to that extent. So I think India, alongside making its policies more draconian, I think should also look inwards and see exactly where is it that, it can possibly remodel its approach and attitude towards Kashmir so that ultimately it leads to some kind of settlement between the two.
There has to be some sort of settlement, and that settlement should be actually what Kashmiris want.
Yeah.
Now,
it's a human problem, as I said.
Exactly.
Basically, it's a human problem.
Sir, it is a great issue currently, and one of the oldest as well. Now, Naqvi Saab, since we have done so many shows on this particular issue, now we always blame BJP for that. That, they're hardliners, they have a very different approach, they are not secular at all, and the use of force or aggression is what they want. And they've achieved so many, I would say, targets which they had in their mind through the use of force, brutalities, what we have been witnessing for the last maybe 4-5 years, ever since Modi has been in power. But sir, Congress only talks in favor, a bit in favor of Kashmir when they're in opposition, never when they're in power.
Never.
So, I mean, this dual policy, that when you're in power, you have a different approach, because that is something which majority doesn't like. So you have to go with the flow. And when you're in opposition, you can always pinpoint fingers towards the government. Let's talk about that, sir.
Yes, Faisal, India has a history of violating human rights, violating the basic principles of respect for the individual, and has gotten away with it because of its importance and its international standing. Now, goes back to Gandhi's assassination and Nathan Godse, who was the assassin, who belonged to the RSS. Now, this was a nascent movement in a marginal group which was on the fringes of society. That particular thinking and that kind of movement has now become mainstream. So all kinds of dangers are looming before the Indian Union. Now, in regard to Kashmir, the demographics, they have been trying since the 60s to alter the demography of especially the Srinagar Valley and northern Jammu, where the Muslims are in majority. And they have been trying to remove large settlements and get
basically displace
out
people.
of the displacement. Now, I had heard, and I don't know if it's true entirely, but I had heard that the Indians had gone to Spain. A delegation of Indians had gone to Spain to research how the Muslims were eliminated from Andalusia, which was the Muslim enclave in the Spanish state. And
between France and Spain.
yes, and they had Muslims either changed their names to Christian names or they left, and many of them are now their ancestors settled in northern Africa. And I have spent 5 years in Algeria, and I know that in Algeria also there are Muslims who originated from Spain but who were pushed away. So what was behind this? To find out how this can be replicated in regard to Kashmir. So diabolical, and it is totally irrational. But they can't stand the Muslim presence in Kashmir. And the Indian press and Indian intellect is so wary of going into this that they don't touch it. There are only occasional, like the tip of an iceberg, occasional views that come up. Yashwant Sinha's report was one of them. And Yashwant Sinha's report says he was a former minister and a very highly respected politician. And what it says is that the Kashmiris have already been totally alienated from the Indian Union, and they will never be able to bring them back into the fold. So, that is the situation, that is the predicament of the Muslims, and it is, it is virtually a genocidal kind of approach, if not actually being implemented, but the thinking behind it is to eliminate an entire population which belongs to a certain religion, or whatever it might be,
Religion and area.
ethnic, yeah. So this is a incalculable human tragedy which the world has to take notice of, but they don't. The international community does not. And that is because nobody
This is
wants
not
to,
one of their major priorities, sir, unfortunately.
I have served in Arab countries. Our Arab brothers, they say that, don't ask us to make, to make a choice to choose between Pakistan and India, because we don't want to get into it. So, despite the best of feelings and goodwill for Pakistan, they are not going to do anything about Kashmir. And
So that is very, very unfortunate at the same time that whenever we talk about Kashmir issue, a lot of diplomats in particular, so whether you talk about the Europeans or otherwise, most of these seasoned and senior diplomats believe that this is a bilateral issue. And though it is not, it is in the United Nations, taken by the Indians, and obviously so many other countries were a part of it. Now, so over here, let's suppose, there are two options earlier to your earlier question, sir, that whether Narendra Modi has asked him or he has not asked him. I don't believe that he has not asked him. Why would Donald Trump come up with something of this sort on such an issue, sir? And you're talking about two nuclear states being discussed. But, sir, the Lok Sabha, or for that matter, the most influential of the BJP members, they all went against, and they said, well, Modi hasn't said anything. He hasn't himself said yes or no yet. Now, that is something very important. If he says yes, he's going to be in trouble because of the Indian pressure. If he says no, that means that Mr. Donald Trump is lying or something. Do you think, sir, now he's been caught somewhere in the middle, sir?
Well, I think this is the significant thing that President Trump specifically said that 2 weeks ago he and Prime Minister Modi had this talk, and it was Modi who suggested.
Yes.
This is the pertinent point.
Absolutely.
So now, you're quite right. Until now, Mr. Modi has been totally quiet, not a word from him. Anybody else can say what they want. The world is waiting to see what ultimately he will say. He will, maybe he doesn't say anything. But the fact is that when Mr. Trump's advisors were asked, they came out flat and said, what the president has said is said. Now there are other issues. You see, on the international side, India after Simla and after the Lahore Declaration always tried to take up the view that it's a bilateral problem between us. The world has nothing to do with it. Now, this is what is significant of Trump being asked by Modi, is that he himself has internationalized at the highest level. And the other thing is that last year, for the first time, the United Nations Human Rights Commission in June 2018 came with that report where they have given a list of atrocities committed by the Indian government in Kashmir. First time it's happened. And the Indians tried very hard, lobbying, because the United Nations Human Rights Commission has been there a long time, but it is the first time the report, they have reiterated in July of this year again. In addition, as a colleague here has said, the European Union subcommittee came up and they condemned the atrocities first time. A committee of the House of Commons did the same. Then Amnesty International came with a report, and there has been a very well-researched 10-year document of torture, 430 odd cases, where each case, it's like a PhD thesis they've come up with, and they have given, the New York Times went out and interviewed those very people and asked them what the atrocities that had been committed. And when they found out that this report was actually totally true, they then did a big piece on that report. The New York Times, this is about 3 weeks back. So these are the kind of independent organs of the people, different, and which are coming out and saying this is what the Indian government has done. But as far as states are concerned, whether it's the OIC or others, they look at this whole Kashmir issue in a different optics, because they have to deal with both. And India has gone further ahead economically. They are now a $3 trillion economy. So the trade relations, you see, has a more significance to most countries than the niceties of morality, ethics, and other things. This is the tragedy of the, in all interstate relations. And this is what has given them advantage over Pakistan. We have just a 300 billion, it's 10 times our economy, or 11 times our economy.
Yeah,
They've gone ahead.
correct.
Now we must know that. And this is why in the interstate relations that has happened, I have yet to find, other than a few people who come out even in India. Yes, in 1984, when Indira Gandhi was assassinated and the general elections took place in India, BJP got 2 seats in the Lok Sabha. Congress had 401. It's the reversal now 35 years later. BJP has got 330 seats. Congress is hardly 40. So that's a complete change in the Indian context. To say Hindutva is the reality of India today. It's through the votes they've done it. And just to skip it over, Congress is nowhere, except in 3 southern states where BJP has not won. And it's the South which has stood up. 3 of their states have not voted with BJP. They've even gone into Bengal for the first time after many years. Bengal had a communist government for 17 years. And if you look at the context of the 29 states of India, they have movements, Maoist movement in 200 out of 600 districts in India. Unfortunately, our analysts, we don't look at the Indian political scene. We must, because that is what we would find out. They have treated Kashmir with such, as my colleagues have said, in the most atrocious form that is possibly there. And to dislocate people, 35A, what does it do? It defines who a Kashmiri is. And now they want to undo that, because they would like anybody from anywhere in India to just come up and buy all the turf, and thereby dislocate people so they can do it. Indian occupied Kashmir has 88 seats in the assembly. In this last assembly, which was then dissolved, the BJP for the first time was a junior partner of the government. And then they...
With Mehbooba Mufti.
Yeah. And then when the government was out, they had governor's rule. Now they have president's rule.
Yeah.
So at the end of the president's rule, there'll be new election. And in order to do that, they're also bringing in a new delineation of the constituency. Or delimitation of constituency. This is dangerous, because the constitution of Indian occupied Kashmir says they can't have it. There are 2 interpretations till the year 2025 or 2030. Now this is the dynamic which they are looking at. They're looking at all kinds of options where they can reduce, but the numbers of Muslims are so large, 80%, that they may find it difficult, but they
But sir,
couldn't
if they are
coalesce.
displaced in various areas, like for example earlier mentioned by Ambassador Saab, that when you talk about the valley, or you talk about certain other places where there is a majority of Muslims, and for example they're displaced, and more people are picked up from various parts. A lot of soldiers are living there. A lot of retired officers have been given plots to construct their houses there. A lot is happening. Let's suppose, sir, after 5 years or 3 years, there are negotiations going. Eventually, once they see that everything is taken care of out there, now we can hold a referendum, which could give you somewhat like a Brexit kind of a, ratio, 49 to 51 or something. This is what they're looking at, actually.
But that may be their goal, their objective, but in the meantime, the people of Kashmir.
Okay, sir, we have been joined in by Mani Shankar Iyer ji from Congress. Mani sir, thank you very much for taking out the time and talking to us, sir.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me clearly, sir. We have with us in our studio Syed Fakhr Imam, the chairman of Kashmir Committee. We have with us Rauf Hassan Saab, sir. And we also have with us Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, the former ambassador. Now, the first question, sir. In the recent troop surge, result of frustration of Modi's government in post-Trump mediation offer, what we have heard so far is that more than 50,000 fresh troops, they've been sent to Kashmir, sir, in order to carry out what earlier was happening out there. Why is that so, sir?
Your figure of 50,000 has not come in the Indian media. What has come is 10,000. And I'm concerned about 10,000 more going in there. But I think we need to first distinguish between what Trump claimed Mr. Modi had said to him and what Mr. Modi has claimed he didn't say to him. Not himself, he's not made a statement, but his Minister of External Affairs and his Defense Minister have both denied in Parliament that he said any such thing. It has led to various jokes in India that he perhaps suggested that Trump should meditate in Kashmir, and he heard it as mediate. But these are just jokes. The fact of the matter is that even I, an implacable opponent of Mr. Modi in Delhi, do not believe that he has gone so completely off the rails as to actually suggest to the US President that he wants mediation or arbitration by the United States. And Mr. Trump's own reputation for either telling the truth or for understanding issues or for articulating them correctly, even grammatically, is so poor that I find it impossible to believe that Mr. Trump actually stated what Mr. Modi had stated. In any case, irrespective of what Modi has claimed, the position of India as a whole, the government and the opposition, is that there is no scope whatsoever for mediation or arbitration by any outside power, including the United States of America.
That's a very, very straight statement, sir, because it was a very candid kind of a conversation when Mr. Trump told our Prime Minister that Mr. Modi, basically he was referring to the meeting in Osaka in Japan, sir, where Mr. Modi himself, in fact, approached
G20.
the American president and asked for, he used the word mediation, sir. Now, arbitration or otherwise, in either cases, either Narendra Modi is not coming up with the truth or Mr. Trump is lying. What is your comment on this, sir?
Trump is lying.
Donald Trump is lying. So you believe that Donald Trump, whatever he has said, was an absolute lie, and Narendra Modi has never said or has never meant anything
like that.
like that, sir?
Well, you're welcome to believe it if you want to believe it. But I
Yes, sir. A
assure
statement
you,
coming out from the President of the United States of America while meeting our President. And I think to Donald Trump, whether people like him or do not like him, that's a separate chapter. But at the end of the day, the gentleman is the President of the United States of America, the most powerful man on earth, sir.
and therefore,
I think if he has said something,
Hitler was the most powerful man in Germany. So please don't live under this illusion. Whatever Mr. Trump may have understood, whatever Mr. Trump may have said, the government of India and the opposition of India together have determined that there will be no mediation or arbitration by any outside power in the matter of Kashmir. And I personally have been long advocating that we should be in dialogue with Pakistan on Kashmir, following on the Musharraf formula, the 4-point formula, which I think was not just a step, it was a leap in the right direction, and it is greatly to be regretted that most of the Pakistan establishment behaves as if the 4-point formula was never, ever evolved.
sir, let me give you an example here. I remember when President Musharraf was in India, our foreign minister, Khurshid Kasuri, I spoke to him personally. exactly maybe 38 hours prior to what
Who's
happened
a great
eventually.
friend of Mani Saab.
Remember, sir?
Khurshid Saab is a great friend of Mani
Yeah,
Saab.
yeah, Khurshid, Salman Khurshid, right?
Khurshid Kasuri Saab is a great
Khurshid
friend of...
Kasuri, yeah. Because we've been to his house there as well. Said now Kasuri Saab categorically mentioned that get ready for great news. Kashmir issue is almost taken care of. Eventually, when I spoke to him later, he said it wasn't Pakistan, it was the Indian establishment which was creating problems in commas and full stops and so on and so forth. So, sir, primarily, one should not blame Pakistan or our establishment. Don't you think the Indian politicians also need to look into what is happening inside their countries, especially their establishment, the kind of mindset they have? They also need to change.
I'm afraid the attitude that you are displaying just now shows that you are in denial of the most constructive period in India-Pakistan relations, which was when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister here and President Musharraf over there. And we have the testimony of Mr. Kasuri's book, Neither a Hawk Nor a Dove, which establishes where we went. And I was only making the point that having gone that far, it really is very regrettable that the Pakistani establishment is denying what happened. In any case, irrespective of whether you accept that there was or was not a 4-point formula, the fact of the matter is that that was arrived at by bilateral negotiation, not by mediation or by arbitration. And therefore, today...
Sir, we also got to know that it was Mr. Advani, if you want me to take the name, who played the role of a spoiler there, sir. Is it correct?
Why are you interrupting me when I'm telling you my side of the truth? You
Go
have
ahead,
to
sir.
prove you're a very loyal Pakistani, but it's not necessary to do so in the middle of asking me to come onto your program. I am maintaining that Mr. Trump's reputation, which has just been established by the former British ambassador to Washington as an inept man, as a completely confused human being, he has gone and made this statement. We have denied that that is true, and on this the country is united. There has been proof that if we do involve ourselves in a bilateral dialogue with you on Kashmir, we can move in a positive direction, and it is for that reason that I am an advocate of moving in the direction of the bilateral dialogue that was envisaged in the Shimla Agreement.
All right. Let's suppose if Article 35A in Kashmir, if that's abrogated, sir, would you support that decision or would you disagree with that?
I am opposing it. I would oppose it. I'm going to Srinagar in a week's time in order to make my opposition to the removal of Article 35A completely clear and in the public sphere, in Kashmir itself and in my country as a whole. But that is a domestic matter and has nothing to do with the India-Pakistan equation on the question of Kashmir.
My understanding is not an internal issue, sir. Indians took it to the United Nations, and when you take it to the United Nations, there are different parties associated, and it should not be, technically, it shouldn't be just a domestic or local issue of India, because when people are being killed, the way we hear and the way we see, the way when we meet and we get to know, I think Human Rights Commission has given a very detailed report about that, sir. So obviously, it is a concern to us as well, as a neighbor, as a Muslim, as a Pakistani, and on top, when we hear that fresh troops are being deployed there, you said the number was 10,000 to 20,000. We have heard that additional 50,000 will be deployed there. 50,000, this was the number I read recently in one of the reports. But anyway, sir, thank you very much for your comments. Over to you, sir. Now, the gentleman says that Donald Trump is lying and he shouldn't be trusted.
Well, the report that he's referring to by the British ambassador is extremely damning on Trump, and it's gone beyond stating that he lies and things of that sort. Anyway, but I would not get into that.
The one who went back, who resigned.
The fact of the matter is that until and unless Prime Minister Modi comes out and makes a statement one way or the other, it is very difficult for anyone to be judgmental that Trump is telling the truth. Or
And it
he's
is
not
believed
telling the
generally when
truth.
somebody says quiet means that he has done it.
So may have. I'm not saying he did not do it. I'm also not saying that he actually did it, because the trustworthiness and the credibility of President Trump is not so high that every word, every sentence that he speaks, has to be believed. But then the important thing is that the United
Sir,
States of
hold on,
America.
sir,
Just to
sir,
say, I just
no,
want
no,
to
sir.
make a point. United States has tried 5 times in the past to mediate between Pakistan and India. It's on record. It's part of history, basically. And the most important mediation effort came when India lost to China in 1962, right, sir? And it was the Americans actually sent their former ambassador to the Soviet Union, then Soviet Union, to Pakistan and India. And it went on, this mediation went on for a number of years. And I think India agreed to ceding more territory to Pakistan in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. But Pakistan wanted even more. So unfortunately, this was done by President Kennedy. It's part of history. So it did not work. Then after 1965, of course, the mediation was by the former Soviet Union. And so we have the similar agreement, which, by the way, is that the sentence over there, I've just marked it here, it says that the resulting settlement, the similar agreement stated that the two countries would, and this is important, settle their differences by peaceful means through bilateral negotiations. It is stated there. Indian position is that it supersedes everything that happened before it. Although that is not contained in the similar agreement itself. It's a technical thing, basically. They say that by including this line, it has superseded everything that happened before it, including the United Nations resolutions and all that. That is not Pakistan's position, and I cannot conclude from just this statement that their stance is correct. You see, that stays. It does not. But the stress has always been on bilateral, and in fact, Mani Shankar's position is that Pakistan and India should engage in an uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue. And he has stated it in our tracks also, very openly, very candidly. So he has taken some very principled positions also, by the way. He's one of those politicians in India, who speak a lot of truth and who have the courage to say it in public, like he's going to Kashmir now, and he'll make his opposition to 35A very public. I trust him on that. So the important thing is that at the end of the day, it's not a third party which is going to help you. UN is not going to help you. As my friend has said,
if the Indians
Muslim
are not ready
countries
to
are
talk,
not.
they're not
the
ready
Muslim
to negotiate, then how can we proceed, sir?
But the problem is India, and the problem is, as I understand it this way, that India has technically 3 positions. With the international community, the position that it takes is that it's a bilateral issue. With Pakistan, with whom it has a bilateral issue, and it must be discussing this problem with them, it preconditions it with Pakistan moving against terror. And when it comes to Kashmir itself, they say that Kashmir is an integral part of India. So these are the conflicts, basically, in Indian position itself. That with 3 different sectors, it has 3 different positions, which are not tenable, mutually tenable. So understandably, India has to do a lot of work also, but simultaneously, Pakistan must also stop banking on outside powers. The important thing is that it has to come up with a narrative which raises the stature of the struggle of Kashmir.
We need to talk to them. They're not ready to talk.
Yeah. Well,
so
fine.
What do we do?
That's okay. We must continue to raise this at the international fora, and I've seen that since the induction of the PTI government, there's a lot of effort which has gone into it.
All right.
There's a lot of effort, and that is the right approach. The United Nations reports, 2 of them, the discussion in the EU Parliament, and so many other reports which have come out, which have just been discussed by our friend here. We must add to them. Increase sensitivity to Kashmir, atrocities. And I think that is the only way you can take it forward. But taking it from India possibly is not a prospect. And the 4-point agenda, the 4-point agreement actually, or the understanding that was reached because it was never signed. Let me tell you, I personally feel that is the best way to move forward. It has to be give and take. If you expect that you are going to have Kashmir as part of Pakistan, well, that's not happening anytime soon. I can't project, let's say 200 years from now or 100 years from now, what happens.
We just want that the Kashmiris should have the right to self-determination. That is it.
Well, that's not happening anytime soon. That is not
nothing is happening,
soon.
sir.
So move forward on making life more tolerable for the Kashmiris. As I said, it's a human problem, basically. So if you can do so by a mutual give and take, I think that should be, and that was actually the basis of that
Alright.
4-point
Alright.
charter that we had agreed with India, which unfortunately was sabotaged by the Indians themselves,
Yeah,
not by Pakistan,
but
which is a
Shahrukh Saab
tragedy.
says that it was the Pakistani establishment. I still remember.
he was talking
our,
about the-
our politicians were so hopeful at that time.
Yeah, they were.
And,
They
and
were.
because I've spoken to them personally, and they've said, yeah, we were ready for it, and great news were coming, and we were like, are we dreaming or is it true? Nothing happened. So this is one of the unfortunate parts, sir. And I still remember when we were in India.
Yeah.
On the last day when the draft was supposed to be finalized, we had the similar problem of commas and full stops, if you remember.
We had
so
problems.
this is
the
where
very
the problem
senior
seems
Indian
to be.
politician sitting in that
Mr.
track.
Jha, I remember.
Yeah, the former ambassador, and so many others were there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So they
Sir,
have to be very
your closing
sensitive about
remarks, sir. Like the ambassador's approach now.
Well, there's no special ambassador's approach. It's an analysis that we all undertake. The point is, A, Modi should himself come out and speak. If Trump can speak, why can't Modi? No, Modi is no sort of higher figure on a pedestal who will not come down to speak. He has to tell the world whether he talked to Trump on this in the manner that Trump has conveyed to Prime Minister Imran Khan. And you see the denial of Jaishankar, Subramaniam and others in the Lok Sabha, etc. That is understandable and that is accepted for whatever it is worth. But the man who talked to Trump one-to-one is the one who will be able to, historians and scholars will be researching this for years and years. Now, that's one. The second is that the Indian government has to realize that this issue cannot be shielded from outside. You know why? This is the information age, my friend. Faisal, there's social media, there are pictures on Twitter that can be released every minute.
Despite the kind of control the Indians have in
Despite
Kashmir.
the kind of control.
But still we end
they
up getting
used
so
to
much.
stop the amnesty, they used to stop all the outside agencies from going.
Unmo Gip has
Unmo
been kicked out.
was kicked out. So, that they have done in the past. But now, they cannot control the flow of information and the world will become aware of this and will become cognizant of it, and whether it's going to happen now, it's going to happen 10 years later or 15 years later. But I think if this whole position is being eroded permanently.
Well, let's see, sir, what happens, but one should keep hope.
Yeah.
I think hope is a good thing. Anyway, Ambassador, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, sir. Thank you. It was a pleasure to have you as well, sir. And that's all we have for this. I'll see you, inshallah, tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.